Welcome back to Close Up. Republican candidates for Congress in New Hampshire's 2nd District are in a bit of a waiting game right now. In fact, we all are. Everyone is eager to see what changes, if any, the state Senate might make to the new congressional map drawn up and passed by the House. Why does this matter? Well, if that map survives, it would make it virtually impossible for a Republican to win in CD2. So here this morning to discuss that and more is 2nd District Republican candidate Robert Burns. Thanks for joining us this morning, Robert.
Adam, thanks for having me on.
So if they pass that map, what's the point? Why even put up a fight of a campaign if those deep blue communities of Durham, Dover, and Portsmouth are suddenly glommed on to CD2, rendering the district almost kind of incompatible with life for a Republican candidate?
Sure, it'll be tougher. There's no doubt about it. But to say it's impossible, anything's possible. Any candidate can win anywhere, particularly when you have the right year. You have to remember when I ran in 2008 against Chris Pappas, I lost by about 3 points. And then in 2010, I won by about 19. That was a 23-point shift. The other thing, too, is a lot of the towns that they're trying to move and into this CD2 are actually the towns that are starting to trend more Republican, like northern New Hampshire, Carroll and Coos County, whereas they're trying to keep towns that are starting to trend blue, like Bedford, Merrimack, and Goffstown. As you remember, Eddie Edwards, I think, lost all 3 of those towns. Matt Mowers lost Merrimack by a huge margin, and then he barely won Bedford and Goffstown. So it's a little bit of the map is not really forward thinking. But it's just a bad map. And I think Governor Sununu's been pretty clear that that's not going to be the map that passes. And we're waiting to see what the Senate does. And I think they'll come up with something a little bit better.
Yeah, given the climate for 2022, it looks like it's going to be a good Republican year. So you think this is a mistake that the existing CD2 is winnable right now?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the people that are in here saying that CD2 isn't winnable because we've had a Democrat there, they haven't spent their life in New Hampshire like me. I mean, they don't remember Dick Sweat. And I hear all the time the only reason Charlie Bass won that congressional seat was because of abortion. You weren't in the state then at that time because that was about the assault rifle weapons ban, and it was about guns, not abortion, why Charlie Bass went on to win that seat and then hold it for a decade. But we've seen these shifts in politics in places like New Hampshire or Vermont or Maine or Florida, where, you know, one day they're Republican, then they go Democrat, and then they go back to Republican.
It's certainly a time of upheaval in politics for sure. And you've got a lot of support from President Donald Trump's core supporters here in New Hampshire. But a lot of people are looking at this CD2 race in the primary and seeing Jeff Cousins as the front runner. Do you think he's conservative enough to win this primary?
I honestly don't know what Jeff Cousins stands for. I mean, if you look at his website, there's legitimately no policy on there. The entire 4 years that Trump was president, he went back and erased his Twitter account, so we can't actually see where he stands on Trump. And honestly, I can't imagine that anybody would think that somebody's a front runner who has virtually no social media presence. I mean, I think I just crested 6,000, which are mostly Facebook people in New Hampshire on my Facebook recently, and Jeff is still floating under 200. When I go out and actually speak to the people of New Hampshire, I mean, when I go to bars, restaurants, business owners and stuff, nobody knows who this guy is, and they don't know anything about him. And I legitimately know nothing about his politics because he doesn't like to talk about actual issues.
What is the case to be made against Congresswoman Annie Kuster in November?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think you've got voter fatigue, number one. She's been there for a long time, and she hasn't really even given the progressives anything that they want. We just saw through her recent fundraising, I mean, she's a corporate shill. She gets the vast majority of her money from corporate PACs and corporations, and she's really not here campaigning in New Hampshire. I've noticed every time that she's been on your show, you know, she's zooming in from Washington, D.C., you know, and I can't say that about the other federal candidates because I actually see them around the state a lot. And I really don't see or hear about Kuster in the state of New Hampshire. We've also seen recently, you know, she took these huge donations from Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson. And last week she was on your show talking, you know, complete propaganda about the vaccines, saying that they were 100% effective of keeping people out of the hospital or dying, which is just untrue. And when you're taking thousands to tens of thousands from the corporations making these vaccines, you have to wonder what her motivations are. And she's really not looking out for the people of New Hampshire.
Just one point of clarification. All of the U.S. House candidates and representatives are zooming in. So we're doing that to her. I'm sure she'd want to be here too, just like everyone else is.
But she was in her office.
Just wanted to clarify. Just wanted to clarify.
Sure.
It's our policy right now. So you're an international business. What can Congress do to address the supply chain issues? I know we talked about this, back when you were on the program in July. So this is a complex global issue. Does Washington have the answers that can just unlock this right now?
Yes, they do for a lot of the issues that we have. Now, not everything. I'm a free market guy. I do believe in free market, and I am an international business. So I sell to different countries and I buy products that are sold here from different countries. But one of the areas that I work in is pharmaceutical. And when I look at pharmaceutical, when I look at military, and when I look at food safety, I say to myself, we need to be doing this manufacturing here in the United States. Now, the number one reason that pharmaceutical companies have moved overseas is because it is cheaper. But it's not cheaper because of lower wages. It's cheaper because of less regulation. In China and India, they don't have to deal with the same OSHA regulations, the same FDA regulations, the same environmental regulations that we do. When they have chemicals, they dump them right into the river. When they have explosions at Chinese pharmaceutical plants that kill 20 people, there's no investigation. There's a new sign on that company the next day. And it just disappears and there's no lawsuits. Maybe they might execute the CEO or what have you, but it's just business as usual. And when we have to compete in an environment like that, it's unfair for American businesses. And quite frankly, it's a national security threat. And we should be treating it as a national security threat, bringing back certain manufacturing to the United States.
You have voted for the infrastructure bill that passed to the House last year?
No.
You want to explain why?
There was a lot of pork in it. There was a lot of pork in it. We saw the ridiculous things that were in there. And I'm not going to go on each specific ridiculous thing, but an infrastructure bill should have just focused in on infrastructure, not, giving rural reporters X number of dollars to keep rural newspapers going. That didn't have anything to do with infrastructure. And I know that was, one of the more random things that was in the Build Back Better plan. And then there was just a lot of pork for, Democrat states and those Democrat senators and stuff who are bringing home the bacon. And I really hate these omnibus bills that have so much in them that we're gonna wait till the bill's passed till we figure out what's in it. And I'm not gonna vote for stuff like that.
The Republicans appear to have the political winds at their back in this cycle in 2022, but the most important figure in the party, former President Donald Trump, really wants to keep talking about the 2020 election and his opinion that it was somehow stolen from him. Certainly, there are a lot of Republican voters who are interested in that, and that's a core issue, but do you think that's a winning message in 2022?
No, I don't think that the stolen election is a winning issue, but I do believe that voter integrity is a huge issue. Now, did Donald Trump get more votes than Joe Biden? No, I don't believe that. Were votes stolen? Absolutely. And do we have a lot of voting issues, including with the voting machines here in New Hampshire? 100%. You've got people in New Hampshire saying that we've got the gold standard and there's no problems. Well, that's just untrue. Even in a race for executive council a few years back, I remember one ward, I was able to shift by 100 votes because of a miscount. So, we have problems, and I don't see why the Democrats just want to bury their heads in the sand and refuse to audit or do random audits around the state to make sure that these machines are working and that the votes are correct.
Do you agree with former President Trump that some of the people who are facing charges in the riot at the Capitol should be pardoned?
So what he said is, and what you said is more correct than what other people have said. Like last week, Ann Custer said he wants to just drop all the charges. Okay, there's definitely some people that are going to be charged that wouldn't get pardoned. There's a lot of people who are being investigated, unfairly investigated, who never stepped foot even on congressional grounds, that are having their financial records subpoenaed, their phone records subpoenaed. And yeah, there's probably going to be some people that are prosecuted and maybe even convicted that it will be totally unfair, and maybe pardons or commutations are in order. But that's something every president has done. You have to remember, I think the last 3 Democrat presidents we've had have pardoned and commuted the sentence of multiple people charged, convicted of things like terrorism and sedition, including Jimmy Carter, 5 terrorists who went into the Capitol building, 3 terrorists, who went into the Capitol building and shot 5 congressmen. And yet he went and commuted these sentences. And Barack Obama commuted the sentence of people who committed treason, like Chelsea Manning. So it's just so hypocritical when I hear these people freaking out that somebody would say that I might pardon or commute sentences of people I think that are being treated unfairly, when we've seen actual convicted terrorists pardoned and commuted by past presidents.
All right, Robert Burns, CD2 candidate, thanks for joining us on Close Up.